It is January 2nd. A man walks into a gym, signs a contract, and pictures the version of himself who shows up 3 times a week for the rest of the year. He hands over his card, gets his key fob, and walks out feeling like a different person already. 90% of the time, he is not. Within 6 months, roughly half of new gym members like him will have stopped showing up entirely. And here is the part almost nobody clocks on the way out the door. That is not a failure of the business. For a huge slice of the gym industry, that is the business. Some gyms make more money from the people who never come back than from the people who do. Today we are going inside the real economics of one of the most misunderstood businesses in the country. Before we talk about money, you need to understand what a gym is actually selling. Most people assume it is equipment and space, a room full of machines that anyone can use if they show up and put in the work. That is not really the business. A gym sells the same square footage to 2 completely different kinds of customers, and it only survives because one of them almost never uses what they paid for. The member who shows up 4 times a week, sweating on the same treadmill, taking up a rack, running up the water bill, actually costs the gym money over time. The member who signs up in January, goes twice, and quietly keeps paying $20 a month until they forget they're subscribed is close to pure profit. Nearly all of the budget gym's real margin comes from that second person. And understanding why is the thread that runs through this entire business. Let us start before a single member walks through the door. Opening a gym is a genuinely expensive undertaking, and the range is enormous depending on what kind of gym you're building. A small boutique studio, the kind built around one class format, can open for as little as $15,000 to $30,000. A serious independent gym with a full floor of strength and cardio equipment typically runs somewhere between $50,000 and $250,000 once you count build-out, flooring, and mirrors. A large commercial facility with a pool, a track, and a full class schedule can easily cross $1 million. And if you want to open under a recognizable brand name, that number jumps again. A single Planet Fitness franchise location, once you include the franchise fee, construction, and equipment, now costs somewhere between $1.3 and $5.4 million to open, according to the company's own disclosure documents. Renovation alone commonly runs $50 to $150 per square foot, which means before a single dumbbell is racked, a modest 5,000 square foot space can already have eaten hundreds of thousands of dollars. This brings us to a number you have probably heard, and it is worth pausing on because it is almost completely wrong. You have likely seen the claim that 81% of gyms fail within their first year. It gets repeated constantly in blog posts, in videos, in pitch decks warning new owners to be careful. That number traces back to a single unsourced comment made during an industry webinar in 2018. It was never a real study. It was never a data set. It was one person's impression of the boutique studio market, and the internet simply copied it until it started to sound like fact. The real number, drawn from Bureau of Labor Statistics survival data that tracks every industry in the country, is far less dramatic. Roughly 22% of new businesses close within their first year, and gyms track close to that broader small business average, not some catastrophic outlier. The myth of the doomed gym is more dramatic than the truth. The truth is a gym failed for the same boring reasons most small businesses fail. Too little cash reserve, too much rent, and not enough paying members walking in the door. Quick pause before we go further, because this next part is where the real story starts. If you're enjoying learning how these industries actually work behind the scenes, hit like and subscribe so more of these breakdowns land at your feed. It genuinely helps the channel keep going. Okay, back to it. Here is where the fantasy and the reality really start to separate. People assume that once a gym has a healthy list of members, the money takes care of itself. In reality, a full membership roster and a profitable gym are not the same thing, and this brings us to the single biggest misunderstanding about this entire industry. The monthly membership fee, the $20 or $30 or $50 a month that most people think of as the entire business, is barely where the real profit sits. Membership dues alone typically carry a net profit margin somewhere between 10 and 15% industry-wide. That is healthier than a restaurant, but it is nowhere near the cash machine most people imagine when they picture a packed gym parking lot. So where does the real money actually come from? It comes from two places operating quietly underneath that monthly fee, and the first one is almost invisible until someone shows you the math. Budget gyms deliberately sell far more memberships than their building can physically hold, because they know most of those members will rarely, if ever, use the space. Industry data suggests that up to 2 out of every 3 gym memberships go essentially unused in a given month. A well-known low-cost chain has openly built its entire footprint around this fact, signing up thousands of members per location while designing rooms that can comfortably fit only a few hundred people at once. The pizza nights, the bagel mornings, the massage chairs by the front desk, none of that is really about fitness. It is about making a membership feel worth keeping for someone who has quietly stopped going, because the moment that person cancels, the gym loses pure margin. The person on the treadmill every single day is not the customer subsidizing the business. The person who has not been in 3 months is. The second source of real profit sits in the services layered on top of the base membership. And this is where a gym stops being a real estate business and starts being a retail one. Personal training typically carries gross margins of 60 to 80%, making it by far the highest margin thing a gym sells, and it commonly accounts for 15 to 25% of total revenue at a well-run facility. Group class packages, retail merchandise, and supplements sold at the front desk carry their own healthy markups on top of that. Put together, gyms that lean hard into personal training, classes, and retail routinely post net margins in the 25 to 35% range, more than double what a gym running purely on bare membership dues ever sees. The treadmill gets you in the door. Everything sold to you once you're standing in the lobby is where the real money lives. Now let us talk about how gyms actually get people to sign that contract in the first place, because the January rush is not an accident either. Almost every serious gym times its entire marketing calendar around the first few weeks of a year, when New Year's resolutions are at their most powerful and the least examined. Roughly 12% of annual gym signups happen in January alone. Gyms know that the emotional commitment driving that sign-up rarely survives contact with February. Behavioral economists call this a form of pre-commitment. People do not just want a gym membership. They want to lock in a version of themselves who goes 3 times a week, and paying for it in advance feels like buying proof that this time will be different. The gym is not lying to anyone. It is simply very good at selling a feeling at the exact moment that feeling is strongest, knowing that feeling has a short shelf life for most people who buy it. This brings us to the most extreme version of this entire strategy, the one playing out at the top of the budget gym industry. A large low-cost chain now operates thousands of locations, each one carrying roughly 6 to 10,000 members, inside a room built to comfortably hold a few hundred people at once. On paper, that sounds unsustainable. In practice, it is the entire foundation of a multi-billion-dollar public company. The average location pulls in close to $1.8 million a year in revenue, and franchisees typically run operating margins around 30 to 40%, extraordinary numbers for a business built on gym equipment. The 3-year failure rate for this specific chain sits at roughly 2%, compared to closer to 9% for the fitness industry overall. That gap is not because the equipment is better or the trainers are more skilled. It is because the entire model has been engineered, almost mathematically, around members who do not show up. Now let us put real numbers around a normal independent gym, not a national chain, to see how this actually plays out on the ground. A mid-sized independent gym built out for around $150,000, once you add licensing, insurance, and a cash reserve, might represent a total investment closer to $200,000. With 300 members paying an average of $45 a month, that gym brings in about $13,500 a month from memberships alone, or roughly $162,000 a year. On its own, that revenue barely clears the rent, payroll, and utilities most gyms carry. But add a personal training program generating another 15 to 20% of revenue on top, plus retail and class packages, and the same gym can push its blended net margin from somewhere around 12% up toward 25 or 30%. The difference between a gym that survives and a gym that genuinely thrives almost never comes down to how many members it has on paper. It comes down to how much of that membership base is paying for something beyond the base rate, and how many of them have quietly stopped showing up without quite getting around to canceling. Run the decline scenario. A competing gym opens 2 blocks away with a lower monthly rate and a flashier renovation. The members who are on the fence, the ones who are already going twice a month instead of 4 times a week, start drifting over. Personal training bookings soften because those same members were the ones most likely to add a trainer once they felt invested. Retail sales barely move because they were never the main event anyway. But the membership base, the recurring monthly dues that were quietly funding the rent and the loan on the build-out, starts eroding a few members at a time. Because roughly a third of a typical gym's membership base cancels or lapses every single year, even without a competitor down the street. This kind of gym has to keep replacing a large chunk of its customer list constantly, just to stand still. A restaurant with good food can survive for years on quiet consistency. A gym's entire pricing model depends on constantly refilling a leaking bucket faster than it drains. And that is the real secret behind every gym you have ever walked past with a packed parking lot and a line of people signing up in January. Behind that wall of mirrors and rows of treadmills sits a business running 2 completely different economies under the same roof. One is built on the small number of people who actually walk through the door and use what they're paying for, a group that is expensive to serve and thin on margin. The other, quietly funding most of the profit, is made up of people who meant to come back, paid anyway, and never quite did. If this changed the way you look at your own gym membership, do us a favor and hit like, and subscribe if you want more of these deep dives into the businesses hiding in plain sight all around you. We will see you in the next one.